Present. All right, so welcome again to another day of biology. Today is January 11th, 2021. Today we're going to talk about an acronym called STERNGRR. And STERNGRR is an acronym that allows us to summarize some of the 8 life processes, the 8 processes that are essential to life. All living organisms on planet Earth do some combination of these 8 processes, and we're going to talk about them today. But before we jump into that, before we get started with our warm-up, I wanted to give you all a message of positivity, which is typically how I like to start the week. And oftentimes I'll connect it to something that has happened in history. I am a fan of history. I actually applied to be a social studies teacher when I was applying to teach here in North Carolina. But because I had taken so many science classes in college, I was stuck in the science department, but that's okay. Nonetheless, I'm still a fan of history, and I like to read about things that have happened in the past. And so I'm going to draw today's quote, this week's quote, from something that happened in history on January 11th, but this was how many years ago? 57 years ago. January 11th, 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report that that showed a connection between cigarettes and cancer. So may, in hindsight, look like something that was kind of inconsequential or obvious or intuitive. Obviously, people who are smoking tobacco put themselves at greater risk for developing cancer. But if we can just put ourselves into the shoes of people 57 years ago, this was not such an intuitive conclusion. This was something that people did not take for granted, and smoking was an extremely popular and common activity. So when this report came out, it was a big deal, and over the ensuing decade or so, it continued to be a huge deal because not only did it change the way people lived, but it also changed social policy as we began to see cities ban smoking in certain areas. It changed economic policy as we saw stores put labels on their cigarettes, like the ones you can see on your screen now. Cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health. And then also eventually we saw the label smoking while pregnant can harm the developing fetus. And it also changed financial policy because these companies that were producing massive amounts of tobacco and cigarettes, they had a financial interest in not seeing this report gain traction. So they lobbied against it. And if we were able to watch TV from the 60s and 70s, we would see vast amounts of cigarette advertisements being run. Today, you don't see cigarette ads on TV. In fact, it's illegal in the United States for cigarettes to be advertised or marketed on TV. Interesting, someone might argue that marketing alcohol is just as bad, but that's a discussion for another day. But anyway, the quote that I take from this history is from Kurt Vonnegut, who is a famous American novelist. He said, "Of all the words of mice and men, the saddest are, 'It might have been.'" And so the reason I take this quote reminds me of today's history because it puts us in hindsight. And it forces us to think, what would the world have been like had we known for the hundreds of years in which we smoked tobacco pretty consistently that it was extremely harmful to our health? Well, then we may have made different decisions. Individually, we may have made different decisions, and societally, we may have made different decisions. But in hindsight, of course, it's easy for us to say that. But I want to push you all as we start this week to think about what decisions are you making going forward that you might look back on and say, if only I could have done it this way, or it might have been. So when you start to try to put yourself a week in the future, a month in the future, a quarter in the future, a semester, a year in the future, and then look back to where you are today and think about the decisions that you maybe could have made or didn't make or should have or did make but should not have, then you start to gain some perspective and see, well, I don't want to be put in that position where I might find out that something that I did was harmful. So let me avoid putting myself in that position. Okay, so hindsight can be a blessing and a curse because it can really, really paralyze you to look back and say, if I had only done it this way. Sometimes it's best to just not find out. So keep that message with you this week as you plan, as you make good decisions, and as you work hard. And you'll never have to look back and question on Friday or on Saturday, what would have happened had I turned in all of my assignments on time and I wasn't stressed and I could just relax this weekend and watch my favorite NFL team or watch whatever else you guys are watching these days. All American, I don't. That's probably not it, but who knows? All right. So we've got 6 minutes for the warm up per usual. It is the last day of Unit 0, so you need to scroll all the way down to the bottom of our module for Unit 0, Day 5, and you should find a warm up there. And we will be back in a little So hopefully that was enough time. I know it was just 2 questions to get you all thinking about what makes living things living. And we're going to have a conversation about that in a couple of minutes. But before we do, I have a couple of reminders for you. Number one, please make sure that you have joined the correct Remind chat. So quite a few of you joined the wrong Remind chat, and that's okay. That was probably my fault. I think it was because I originally sent you the wrong link. But all you need to do is text the code on your screen, including the @ symbol, to 81010. So text at STERNGRR, and you'll be able to join our Remind chat. Again, this is not something that I plan on using every day. In fact, I might not even use it every week, but this is a good way for me to get messages out to you all, and also for you to contact me, as a few of you have already done. And I appreciate it. This just opens up another line of communication between us. So please do make sure that you are joining this Remind chat. Additionally, another thing I like to do is provide occasional checkpoints so that you all don't ever get too far behind in the course. These are the 6 assignments that you should have done by now. I want to go over each of them. Can you not make warm-ups timed? Do you mean timed on Canvas? Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's not a problem. I can change that thing. I do also want to remind you that you can always go back and do all the warm-ups and exit tickets too. They're all set so that you have multiple attempts to do them. So if you don't have enough time to do them, you can go back and just reattempt. It's no big deal. And they're also not worth many points, so don't worry too much about it. But thank you for saying that, Janelle. So these are the assignments that we have had so far. It looks like a lot, but I'm going to break them down really quickly for you all so you don't feel discouraged. Number one, U0D1 Student Champion Contact Form is not for you to do. This is something that you can literally copy and paste the link and shoot a text message off to a family member or whoever the adult is who you trust and who's going to hold you accountable this semester. I need to be in contact with that person. So this is going to allow me to collect their contact information in one central location. Number two, create your Google folder. This assignment is quick. It takes less than 5 minutes. So most of you have already done it. I appreciate you. If you know that you still have not created your Google folder, then now is a good time, as good a time as any to do it. The other thing I want to mention is that once you create your Google folder and you start to save things in that Google folder, you do not need to go in and share each assignment with me personally, because you've already given me access to the folder. So I'll already have access to anything you place inside of that folder. You don't need to go back in and share every assignment with me after that, okay? Because it clutters my email inbox because I get email notifications every time. I get email notifications every time someone shares something with me. And then lastly, U0D2, Design Your Virtual Locker, is another quick assignment. It's meant to be fun and creative. I just want to get an opportunity to know a little bit more about you all. The ones that I've seen so far have been quite heartwarming and in some cases funny. So, share whatever you'd like to share on that virtual locker, save it in your Google folder, and call it a day. It does not need to be a Picasso, Rembrandt level work, although it could be. The other 3 are a bit more academic. They'll take a little more time, but hopefully you've been staying up to date and you've already done them. And the reason I bring this up is because these assignments, as well as the one assignment that we will get today, will be due by 11:59 p.m. This is not to stress you all out, but as I've stated before, you do have until the end of every unit to get the assignments turned in for full credit. After that, you can still turn them in. I'll still accept them, but there may be a small late penalty that you'll face. All right. So the objective for today's lesson, would anyone like to read it? Again, that yellow acronym stands for Students Will Be Able To.
Students will be able to describe and exemplify the characteristics of life.
Excellent. So we're going to talk about that acronym, STERNGRR, which allow us to describe the characteristics of life. And then the essential question, and would anyone like to read that? Oh, I thought I saw Araceli getting ready to say something.
How can we relate at least two of the STERNGRR life processes to our human bodies?
Excellent. Cool. So we often talk about things in the context of the human body. Number one, we are humans, so it's good to be able to talk about ourselves. Number two, many of us have medical aspirations. We want to go on to be doctors and nurses and physician's assistants and technicians, and that's all excellent. We want to be able to think not only about the human body, but also life as it comes in its many diverse forms. But it's cool to have that knowledge and know what happens with human bodies too. So I want to do something cool. We're going to do this Menti poll, which will allow us to create some cool word clouds, some visual representations of what we're thinking. So please go to www.menti.com, and I can send that to the chat as well. Nope, don't click on that first one. Not sure where that's going to go. That was a typo. Second one, disregard the first link. Okay. And then enter the code 515153704. And you can just copy and paste it. Copy it and paste it from the chat. It's also going to come up on the next screen. So it should take you to this screen where you will be able to answer this question. And you can do this from your phone as well if you don't want to pull it up on your Chromebook. What are some qualities of living organisms? We just need one word or a two-word phrase, something short. A quality of living organisms. I've got one answer already, and you can answer up to 3 times. I've got growth. They need light. Interesting. Breathing, growing, moving, reproducing, respiration. Good. We've got some big words here. Big in the sense that they are headed in the right direction. We've got 6 different people who've contributed. And the bigger the word is, the more often it has been shared. So if you see a word that you agree with and you're like, yeah, that is a good quality of life, then you can just type it and you can send that as one of your answers as well, so that that word will get bigger and we'll get some consensus going. Because now we've got eating as well, and energy and water. So we've got 9 people who've contributed, but there are 18 of us, not including myself on this call. There are 18, so I'd like to see more people get involved. Again, go to www.men, as in never, ti.com, and use the code 5153704, and that information is in the chat, and it's also at the top of the screen. So let's get as many people contributing as possible. We've now got 19 people on the call. We've only got 11 people who've contributed. So let's keep it going. I see the word regeneration. That's interesting. Regeneration is a quality of life. Now, maybe I should have worded the question differently, because what I really want you all thinking about is something that all living things have to do. These are things that some living things do by choice or as a factor of how they've evolved. But I want us thinking about what all living things have to do in order to live, in order to survive. I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds. We've got 12 people who have contributed so far, and I appreciate the 12 of you. And then we'll talk about this. Okay, cool. So we're thinking already about maybe a food pyramid. They eat off of a producer. Cells is a big one. Reproduce is a big one. Growing is a big one. Breathing is a big one. We've got reproduce is probably the biggest, because we've also got reproducing and reproduction. So, and breathing is probably a little bit bigger than it looks, because we've also got respiration. All right, cool. So we've got 15 people. So does anybody want to take themselves off of mute and make an observation about what they see here, or type something into the chat? What kind of jumps out to you about these responses? Is anything missing, or do you disagree with anything that you see here? Okay, consuming. Okay, good. So Josue is saying that consuming is potentially a missing word. Now, I do see someone has added that they eat, quote, they eat off the producer, unquote. I think that could be considered consuming. Because Josue has given us the one word the one word synonym. Excretion. Okay, Carolyn, all right. You're definitely thinking about something we'll talk about today. So I appreciate you. Your mind is going in the right places.
Like single-celled organisms, like they divide to reproduce.
Okay, yeah. So there are different types of reproduction. So some single-celled organisms, Lance is definitely thinking in the right way. They don't reproduce in the same way that animals reproduce, multicellular organisms. They can basically make copies of themselves. We'll talk much more about that later in the course. That's a good thought.
One of the words I put down, but there is not on it, is like carbon. Like we're carbon-based life forms.
Excellent. Yeah. So essentially, every form of life on planet Earth is carbon-based. In fact, there's an entire field of chemistry called organic chemistry, which focuses on how carbon contributes to life. It's abundant on planet Earth. Almost everything is made up of carbon as a central atom. So that couldn't be more true, Lance. Thank you for that. That was a pretty advanced thought. We are carbon-based life forms. What about light? Someone said light, and then someone said need light. Do living things need light to survive?
No. Things
Okay.
at the bottom of the ocean, they don't get any light and they don't need it.
Okay, so there are
Things in
examples
atoms,
of,
they don't get any light, they don't need it.
yeah, so there are some examples of life forms on Earth that exist perfectly well without any light. There are life forms that exist miles under the surface of the ocean, where, of course, the sun cannot penetrate, and they continue living just fine. Now, you probably could make a case that the vast majority of life on Earth does rely on light, if not directly, then indirectly, because the oxygen that we breathe is made up by plants that are doing photosynthesis, and they need light for that. That's why it's called photosynthesis. So you could probably make a case that most life on Earth relies on light indirectly, as well as the heat that is produced by light. Nutrients. Thank you, JT. So we'll talk about nutrients today as well. So I think we've gotten a lot of good stuff here. You all are definitely thinking about the right thing. I love this word cells. Lance brought up carbon, which is something we're going to talk about a lot in our first unit starting tomorrow. We've got some other things here that are going to come up pretty early on in the course, and some other things that we won't talk about for a while. But the acronym STERNGRR that we'll introduce today will kind of keep us headed in the right direction and keep those terms at front of mind. One more question. So what qualities make human beings unique from other living organisms, or unique in comparison to other living organisms? So again, you've got 3 words. What's that, Lance?
The way we communicate.
You can, if you can, you can type your answer into this Menti so we can get another word cloud. If you don't have access to the Menti, you can send your message to the chat. But we've got one person already who has said that genes make human beings unique. Technology and intelligence make human beings unique. It's coming from 2 people. Body, yada, 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 yada. Okay, that's interesting. Make human being. The song itself, the essence of that music is what makes human beings unique. Death is what makes human beings unique. Okay, interesting. I'm gonna have to have some of you argue and support your words because I don't know that I would agree with some of these, but we'll see. If you can make a case for it, maybe I'll change my mind. What about communication and multicellular? Okay, that's what makes human beings unique. All right, now keep in mind, folks, the word unique means that human beings are unlike any other life form. They're unlike living organisms on planet Earth. So we should be thinking about qualities that make us totally unique. We don't share this quality with any other organisms. I've got language. That is a fascinating one. Communication, I guess, is a part of that language, or language is a part of communication. Personality, fingerprints, DNA. Okay, I think I see what people are going for here. Each human being is unique because of their fingerprints, because of their genes. I see what you're saying. Cultures. Let's give it 30 more seconds and see. We've got humor as well. That's interesting. I think some dog owners would argue that they've got some pretty funny pets at home. I couldn't tell what one. Talents, good. Emotions, religion. Those things maybe fall under culture or psychology, maybe. All right. Does anything jump out at anyone here? Does anyone want to say, no, that doesn't make human beings unique? Can anyone think of any examples?
DNA does not make us unique.
Why is that, Lance?
Onions have more DNA than humans.
Okay, yes. In fact, all living things have DNA. All living things, in fact, that is one of the things that makes life life. And that's how life can be carried on through reproduction. You give your DNA to your offspring, whether it's an exact copy of your DNA, or in some cases it might be a combination of your DNA and another organism's DNA. Or based on new scientific developments, it could be your DNA, another person's DNA, and another person's DNA. So DNA itself is not what makes the human race unique, but it does make us individually unique because as sexually reproducing organisms, no two human beings are exactly alike. We've got Janelle saying multicellular organisms. That's true. So, I mean, it's not true that it makes us unique, but human beings are multicellular. We're made up of approximately 3 trillion cells. So just think about that. When the person who gave a sperm cell and the person who gave an egg cell united for the first time, and that sperm cell ran into the egg cell, they started off as one singular cell called a zygote. And we'll talk about that later in the course. Quickly, that zygote began to divide. It became 2 cells, and then those 2 cells became 4 cells, and those 4 cells became 8 cells. And so you can see how very quickly, because of exponential growth, you can end up having an organism that is made up of many, many millions of cells. And in fact, like I said, we're made up of about 3 trillion cells. So quite a few. Personality, people are coming in and saying I see we've got some psychology terms in terms of emotions and personality. We've got some cultural terms in terms of religion and language. I think language is a good one. We don't really see any oral or written language from other living organisms on Earth. So that's probably a good one. Of course, other organisms have other ways to communicate. Most organisms communicate in some way, even if it's just chemically. They're communicating with pheromones. But of course, there are more sophisticated organisms that communicate with sound, or they can communicate with movement. But a written and an oral language, that's pretty advanced. In fact, as far as I know, our brains are the only brains that are capable of that. Death, that's an interesting one, Michelle. I'm not sure what exactly you mean. Maybe you mean the rituals around death, but there are other organisms that have death rituals as well. There are videos of elephants practicing a death ritual in which they'll walk backwards towards their dead. They'll tap them with their back feet a few times, and then they'll move on. They'll walk away from them. So you can see other organisms having some death rituals as well, but maybe you're saying that, the sophistication of our death rituals in which we bury our dead in specific ways and in specific places, and at specific times, that is pretty unique to human beings. So what I wanted you all to take from this is that for the most part, human beings are not all that unique. We're sophisticated, yes. We do things more than other organisms, or in more advanced ways than other organisms, but we don't do much that nobody else on the planet does. In fact, even very simple life forms, like a bacterium, do most of these things. They might not have intelligence, but they are able to communicate based on chemical signals. They evolve, like JT just said. They also die. They also have DNA. They're also, genetically unique. They don't have cultures, of course, but we might even go and say that there are ape species or ape colonies that do have cultures. We don't know necessarily that they have religions, but they certainly have a hierarchy, and they have leaders, and they have family structures that we might say constitute a culture. So I want us to stop thinking about things as if human beings are up here and everybody else is like way down on some level. Yes, we are sophisticated and advanced. Our brains have evolved in ways that other organisms have not. But that doesn't necessarily mean, and we've caused more damage to our planet than other organisms have, for sure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are alone. We are animals in the same way. We're a part of the same animal kingdom, in the same way that most other life forms that you all are familiar with are a part of the animal kingdom. And even when we think about the plant kingdom, we're not all that different from plants. We're not all that different from the worms that you all see that are a part of, some of which are a part of other kingdoms as well. So we've got to start thinking about these similarities and thinking about how life has come out and evolved over millions of years in many of the same ways, even though it's evolved to have a huge amount of diversity. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. I'm a little behind schedule here. We're supposed to be transitioning into asynchronous. Share this tab. So this acronym STERNGRR is what allows us to apply these qualities and think about these 8 life processes to all living things, all living organisms. Living organisms might get away with not doing 1 or 2 of these, but for the most part, all living organisms are going to do all 8 of these life processes. Some organisms get away with not doing 1 or 2 because they've evolved in very unique, special ways. So as we go through these slides, I don't need you to write down everything that you see, but I do ask that you try to pull out the gist and the most important stuff. These are old slides, so I apologize that I was not able to highlight to point out to you all what I want you to write down, but this is a good practice. Once you all advance in school, again, things are not going to be highlighted specifically for you. Okay. So STERNGRR is an acronym. Of course, that means that all 8 of its letters stand for something. The S in STERNGRR stands for synthesis. And synthesis means that you're building larger molecules from smaller ones. To synthesize something is to build it, to make it. Lance mentioned carbon already. Carbon is typically going to be at the center of synthesis. Now, carbon is an element, and so it is an atom that is extremely, extremely small. You need several atoms to make a molecule, and you need several molecules to make a macromolecule. And then a macromolecule is, for example, protein. Okay, so what we're doing is we're taking small things and we're combining them, we're bonding them together, and those smaller things are becoming larger things. So this is the process of synthesis. This is central to how life came to be. So classic example, we can even see it here. This is happening in all of your cells 24/7. This process is called transcription and then translation. There's a strand of RNA, which is very similar to DNA, but different in some important ways. And this RNA is carrying a message, a genetic message. That genetic message is being used to make a specific type of protein. So we can see that protein is growing out here. The amino acids are being linked, they're being bonded together to create this protein. Now we're going to dedicate an entire unit to what I just said in the last 20 seconds. So don't worry about it right now. But that's synthesis. Specifically, that's protein synthesis. I need you guys to definitely know what that word means. And it's just like Legos. I know most of us have probably had some experience playing with Legos where we take smaller blocks and we build them together. We call them building blocks. And those building blocks can be attached to create these much larger, much more complex formations. Excellent. All living things also need to be able to do transport, specifically internal transport. So inside of their bodies, living things need to be able to move things around from one cell to the next, or from one organelle to the next, or from one organ to the next, from one organ system to the next. In the bodies of animals, typically there's some type of circulatory system that relies on blood. What kind of things does blood carry? You guys can either unmute yourself or send answers to the chat. What does our blood carry inside of it? Oxygen is a big one, Josue, thank you. What else? And this is oxygen right here, O2.
Nutrients?
Nutrients, that's a big one. Thank you, Lisa. Michelle, I saw you come off of mute. Did I interrupt you?
White cells.
White blood cells, excellent. I don't know if you said white specifically or if you just said blood cells, but yeah, we've got many different types of blood cells. Typically, we talk about white blood cells and red blood cells. Red blood cells carry the oxygen, which is what Josue was talking about. And then white blood cells, does anybody know what those do?
They make the blood thick, I think.
What'd you say?
They make the blood thicker.
Okay, yeah, in some cases they do, yeah, they do make the blood thicker. And ultimately what they're doing, if your blood is particularly thick because it has a lot of white blood cells, that means your body is having an immune response to something. So when you get a cold, and that cold is caused by a virus, your white blood cells are going to travel to that virus. Oftentimes that means traveling to your nasal cavities or traveling to your throat, your pharynx or your larynx, and they're going to try to neutralize that invader. They're going to neutralize that pathogen, that virus. And we could dedicate an entire course to that. It's called immunology, study of the immune system. But that's so true. The body is carrying those white blood cells, and it carries other things, water, it carries carbon dioxide. It can carry hormones. So in the body of animals, the circulatory system relies on a heart to pump blood throughout the body to carry certain things towards your brain and away from your brain, and towards your fingertips and away from your fingertips. This is absolutely crucial to life. But again, we don't want to just think about humans. We also want to think about other life forms. In the plant kingdom, plants have specific tissues that are not easy to see because they're so thin, but those tissues exist to carry water. So think about it. There are sequoia trees in California that are over 100 feet tall. And I've seen, when I was younger than you guys are now, my family traveled to see these sequoia trees, and I was astonished by how big they were. The trunks were, 100 feet in diameter. No, that's probably an exaggeration. Let's call it 25 feet in diameter, and the trees were 200 feet tall. And I'm wondering, how do the branches that are way up there at the top of this tree get water? The way they're able to get that is the tree has massive roots. The root system that is under that tree that is supporting it is hundreds of feet wide, and it soaks up a lot of the water that's draining through the soil. And then the tree has a specific type of tissue called the xylem, Zylem, that's going to carry water from the roots all the way up the tree, because those leaves and those branches that are at the top need just as much water as the rest of the tree does to survive. So it's an extremely, it relies on the properties of water, specifically the properties of adhesion and cohesion to get water from the roots all the way to the top. So those same tissues, just like we have veins, trees have xylems. All right, and then they also have something called a phloem. So you also wonder, how do the roots get the food? Because the roots they don't have access to sunlight, so of course they can't do photosynthesis. So they rely on the leaves to make the food. Of course, that's the process of photosynthesis, to use the light to make food. The leaves do photosynthesis and they get the food, and then they allow some of that nutrients from the food to trickle back down the tree through what's called a phloem, all the way down to the roots, so that the roots can stay energized and stay maintain that nutrition as well. So it's pretty cool stuff. All right, excretion. Someone did mention this earlier in the chat. Oops, I'm sorry. Someone did mention this earlier in the chat, but living things need to be able to excrete waste products. So when you eat too much sugar, your body's not going to be able to process it all. And so you've got to be able to get rid of some of it. Otherwise, it'll end up being stored in your body, which is not ideal. So you can do two things. You can urinate, and some of the sugar, some of the glucose is going to come out there. Or you can poop. But we also know that carbon dioxide, that we invaded that dog's privacy. So my apologies. But carbon dioxide is also a waste product. So when you breathe in, you're breathing in not just the oxygen, but you're breathing in everything that's in the air. You're breathing in oxygen and primarily nitrogen, and you're also breathing in, noble gases like neon, and you're breathing in inert gases. So all of those things get breathed in, but your body really only needs oxygen. So the rest of it needs to then get breathed back out, including the carbon dioxide that your body is producing. We produce carbon dioxide. All of our cells are producing carbon dioxide. So we got to get rid of it. So when you breathe out, that's what's coming out of your body, carbon dioxide and those other waste products. Regulation is an extremely important aspect of STERNGRR, an aspect of life in general. So obviously you should notice by now that there are 3 R's in STERNGRR. It doesn't matter which order you put them in, as long as you know that there are 3 R's and you can remember what those 3 R's stand for. Today, the first one we'll talk about is regulation. Living things need to be able to maintain an internal balance. This is a phenomenon called homeostasis. And if we break this down, homeo means man, just like Homo sapiens. Homo means man in this case. It can also mean sane. And then we also see stasis, which is like the word stagnant, which just means remaining still, not moving, not changing, stable. So stable man means maintaining an internal balance. All living things need to be able to do this. Now, some living things aren't very good at it. So Lance, I think, mentioned that there are unicellular life forms like bacteria, meaning it's just one cell. A unicellular life form obviously doesn't have organs that help it to maintain an internal balance. All they can do is just hope that they end up in the correct environment. So, for example, human beings, we've got, before I say that, can someone explain briefly what pH is? Concept of pH. What does pH tell you? Does anyone know?
Like the acidity of water.
Good, yeah, excellent. So pH tells you how acidic something is. Now, I probably shouldn't have started with that. Let me just start with something simple, even though you're right, Dijon. So let me start with temperature. We all know what temperature measures. It measures the amount of heat that's present in a given system. So let's start with just temperature. So human beings, when we get cold, what do we do? What do our bodies do?
Shiver.
We shiver. Thank you, JT. And there are other things that we do as well. You might get goosebumps. You might have a certain desire to kind of like huddle up near yourself and near the ground. And we're doing these things to warm our bodies. Even shivering produces a small amount of movement, which produces heat. Okay, so you're trying to warm our bodies up. More simple life forms like a bacterium, they don't have that ability. So they just kind of have to hope that they end up in the right environment. And if their environment gets a little too cold, then they'll have to swim away into a warmer environment. So their range of temperatures is not as wide as ours might be. Same thing, if we get hot, our bodies have evolved to release sweat. And that sweat, when it evaporates from our skin, is going to cool us down. It's a process called evaporative cooling. So that's an adaptation that allows us to cool our bodies down. Simpler forms of life don't have that ability. They have to be in the right environment to maintain their temperature. Same thing with cold-blooded organisms. They can't maintain their internal temperature, so they have to be in the right environment. But there are other things that we have to strike a balance with as well. pH is a good one. So the pH of our stomach is 2, which is low. The pH scale runs from 1 to 14. The pH of our stomach is 2, meaning it's very acidic. So if you've ever gotten if you've ever heard of acid reflux, someone who's suffering from acid reflux, some of their stomach acid is leaving their stomach and entering their esophagus, and it can be pretty painful. It can feel like your chest is burning, right? That's why we call it heartburn, because it feels like this general area is actually burning, but it's because your esophagus has been exposed to your stomach acid. It's not a good thing. Your stomach acid should only remain in your stomach, where the stomach lining is there to protect the stomach itself from being damaged by that really acidic environment. But if it does happen, our body has to be able to maintain that balance. So our blood really needs to be at a pH of about 7. Our stomach can be at a pH of about 2. So we've got specific insulation that exists in our stomach lining that prevents our blood from interacting with those enzymes that make it really acidic in our stomach. So it's cool stuff that allows us to maintain that balance. Nutrition is pretty self-explanatory. That's what the N in STERNGRR stands for. We're going to talk more about nutrition later in our first unit. But nutrition, even though it's simple, it is very important. We can't understate the importance of maintaining a balanced and nutritious diet. Okay. Growth and development. So the G in STERNGRR stands for growth and development. So several of you did refer to growth as one of the things that, as one of the qualities of life, the characteristics of life. And that's true. So most living things will start off in a simpler, smaller version of what they will eventually become. Oftentimes, this is honestly to allow for birth to be an easier process. If we were all born at full size, that would change the mechanics of how birth is possible. So a baby, when it is coming out of its mother, is actually, its skeleton is made up of about 306 bones, which is 100 more bones than an adult human being will have. The reason for that is that several of the bones have not fused together in order to allow the baby to be to come out of the birth canal easier, to be more flexible. So if any of you have young siblings at home, or if you had a young sibling at home at one point, you probably could remember feeling in that baby's skull. You could push your finger and the head was like mushy. It was soft. There were soft spots in different places on the head. Those soft spots are there because when a baby is first born, its skull has not fused together yet. The different plates of the skull have not fused, and there are soft spots between them to allow the skull to be able to bend as it's coming out of the birth canal. Okay, this is to protect the baby and to protect the mother. And then the last two R's, respiration is one. Respiration is the act of breaking down glucose into energy. So we often think about respiration as just being breathing, but breathing is important because it allows us to take in the oxygen that we need for respiration. And then it also allows us to exhale the carbon dioxide that is a waste product of respiration. Respiration itself is a chemical process. It's a chemical reaction that takes oxygen, glucose, and some specific enzymes to create energy. And then also as a waste product, it also creates carbon dioxide and water. So we'll talk about this much later in the course, probably in March. And then lastly, reproduction is the last R. So Lance mentioned a couple of different forms of reproduction, or he talked about unicellular organisms, how they reproduce simply by making copies of themselves. That's called asexual reproduction. But then more sophisticated life forms reproduce sexually. And this is extremely important because it guarantees a certain amount of genetic variation. Not everybody ends up being exactly the same. And this genetic variation is at the basis of evolution. We'll talk more about that later in the course as well. So that's STERNGRR. So if you didn't write anything down, it doesn't make sense to start now, but it does make sense to take a screenshot of this or to take a picture of it. And maybe you can save it in your biology folder so that you'll have access to it later on. But we've got synthesis, transport, excretion, regulation, nutrition, growth and development, reproduction, and respiration. Again, it doesn't matter which order you put the R's in, but we will come back to this acronym throughout the course. So we like to introduce it to you all, and we want to be able to start making some connections between these terms because they are indeed connected. All right. So if your name is on this list here, that means that you did not complete the diagnostic exam. Some of you might look at this and see your name and be like, what? I did do it. If your name is here and you know you're pretty sure you did do the diagnostic, probably what happened is that you just didn't complete or you didn't hit submit. So I do want you all to do that diagnostic exam. It is going to help me establish a baseline to see how much you grow throughout the semester. The diagnostic exam can be done on SchoolNet, and I'm going to show you in a minute, but I'm going to leave this up. So see if you can identify your name. I see some of you, Janelle. I know Janelle is here. Lance, I thought I saw, was Joshua here too? Yeah, Joshua.
Yeah, I'm here.
Santuan, Ana, Josue. So we've got a lot. Yeah, Nico, you too. So several of you, you've got to do this diagnostic exam, and it's 10 formal points. So people who have already done it, you can check PowerSchool and see right now there's only one grade in the grade book, and it is from this diagnostic exam. And if you did it, you got 100. All right. So your grade right now, if you did that diagnostic on Friday, is 100. It's going to change, but enjoy it while it lasts. So to access the diagnostic, you'll log into NC Ed Cloud. You'll navigate to SchoolNet. There should be an option that says take a test, and you should enter the test code, which is OPBIODIAG. All right, this is not like you need to sit and stress yourself out about doing well on this, but just help me out. This is going to establish a baseline for us as we go through the course. I'm sorry to ruin your day if you're like, man, I thought I did that already. Everybody else, we do have one more assignment, U0D5, STERNGRR practice, so you can knock that out. We only have, yeah, I can put it in the chat. We only have about 10 minutes left. But you guys have until the end of the day to get all of this done. Yes, if you do that diagnostic, you're going to get 100. Well, meaning 100%. It's only 10 formal points, but that still will really help your grade in the beginning part. Thank you for typing that, Santuan. Okay, so I'll leave you all to it. I'll be here if you need anything. Okay, folks, so it is now 1:20. So I know some of you are probably still working. The assignment was short. It was just, I think, 7 or 8 questions. And some of you might still be working on the diagnostic. So that's fine. I think you can pause it and come back to it after 4th block if you need to do that. As long as you get it done, it's not a big deal if that you do well. I just need you to get it done so we have that baseline going forward. Otherwise, I hope you have a great Monday, and I look forward to talking to you all tomorrow.
All right, see you tomorrow.
See ya.